Hello everyone, this is interview 48 of the Bangladeshi Perspective. আজকে আমরা আছি আসিফ জহির ভাইয়ের সাথে. He manages Ananta Group. He is the CEO of Sindabad.
My goodness, and victory for Bangladesh. What a way to start this tournament. It's only a reconfirmation of them as a growing force in the world game. So confirmation of a momentous occasion for
সবসময় I feel যে I don't do justice to the guest introduction. So who is Asif Zahir bhai?
So I'm Asif. I'm Bangladeshi. Grew up in Bangladesh, and here I am, based in Dhaka. Just involved in some organizations, as you mentioned, Ananta Group. I'm a deputy managing director of Ananta, and we're a large garment manufacturer out of Bangladesh. So that's where I spend most of my time, and so quite involved with that business. Other than that, also involved in the e-commerce startup scene, and the co-founder and managing director of Sindabad.com, which is a B2B e-commerce startup.
Apart from work, what else do you associate identity সাথে?
Well, work keeps me quite busy, but obviously it's not supposed to be your identity, right? So, no, I mean, I think as person, obviously, I'm married, and so as a husband, and my mom actually lives with us in our house, so kind of really into the family as well. That's part of a reason that I moved back from the US to Bangladesh after studying there for some time. So the family is a big part of who I am, my friends. Again, friends all over the world, but I guess the ones you grew up with in Bangladesh, they're probably the ones that are most closest to you, and so like to spend time with them. And just a bunch of other hobbies, sports.
You were part of a lot of academic institutions and workplaces before this. Just a brief walkthrough then of your background.
Well, background, so again, I grew up here in Dhaka, Bangladesh, so I went to Green Herald for my O-levels and Scholastica for my A-levels. So, finished school here and then applied to the US universities, got into Stanford, and went out there for my undergrad and studied computer science, majored in that. And I was actually enrolled in a master's program at Stanford as well in CS, but didn't continue that. I got a job at Google as a product manager, so stepped out and wanted to work and earn for a change. So I was at Google for 3 years, 2005, 2008, and that was an exciting time, a lot of new initiatives going on. And then that was kind of going well, but I always knew I wanted to come back to Bangladesh and be part of what's happening here. So 2008, moved back to Bangladesh, got married about the same time. So big change, switch jobs and all of that. So I've been in Bangladesh since 2008, and went back for my MBA at Harvard for a couple of years in the middle, but that was more kind of while I was still quite involved with the business here. It was kind of an in and out 2 years, but really 4 semesters, right? So 16 months away. And so I've been in Bangladesh since 2008, more or less. So.
I just wanted to know কেন কয়েকটা certain decisions নিয়েছেন আপনার লাইফে? So ধরেন switching from Google to coming back here, what are some key decision criteria you had in mind?
Well, it's complicated because I think when you're growing up, and I was into kind of tech, I wanted to be, in Silicon Valley, I wanted to do a startup, and that was my dream. Growing up, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and all of those big names, and you hear about it. So that was a very exciting time to be at Stanford, seeing what's happening. The history there is so rich with all the entrepreneurs and all the venture capital, all the startups, and kind of they just came out of 2001, the .com boom and bust. So there was a lot of history there in terms of what happened, how crazy it was. And I studied computer science, which again was quite difficult because it is a very competitive kind of field. It's quite intense. So luckily enough, like kind of got the job at Google, and it's quite exciting. So that was a path which I thought was what I was going to do, but then I had this kind of other life in Bangladesh, which is quite different. And I think the biggest challenge was that because it's out in California, it's just physically and culturally it's so far from Bangladesh that I saw that it's really two different worlds, and it's very difficult to kind of bridge the two. And it's kind of an either or. So luckily enough, in Bangladesh, we had a small garments business that my brother was involved in running. So at least that was a stepping stone for me to come back and join with him and try and grow the business. Because I think if that wasn't the case, then why would I even move back to Bangladesh, right? In terms of job opportunities or even startup opportunities in 2008, there wasn't really much going on. And so I should have just stayed back in the valley and kind of pursued my career. So at least because I had that opportunity, and then of course my mom who's getting older, and I wanted to spend time with her, and for her like moving to the US wasn't an option.
But হচ্ছে অনেকে আমরা STEM ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড থেকে আসি, ধরেন বুয়েট থেকে গ্র্যাজুয়েট করলো বা ব্র্যাক থেকে গ্র্যাজুয়েট করলো in computer science or whatnot. Why would they want to pursue an MBA? আপনি কেন হার্ভার্ড বিজনেস স্কুলে গিয়ে MBA-টা করলেন?
So I think I think it's kind of a personal decision that you can't really plan out ahead of time. So I was just telling you that if you're in your undergrad and you think, okay, I'm gonna like do this, get a first job and then an MBA and a second job, so it doesn't really work out like that. You kind of have to take every decision based on where you are today, and kind of it's good to have a plan, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I'm not sure if I would have done the MBA if I had stayed back in Silicon Valley as an engineer, because I have an engineering background. I was a product manager at Google. There generally wasn't a lot of respect for MBAs. So you don't really need an MBA to be successful at Google, to be honest, right? So I don't think I would have done that and kind of taken out 2 years, kind of pursuing a career in the valley. Things are moving very fast, and no one would really take out 2 years to like do an MBA, because it doesn't really help. So it really depends on like kind of where you are in that particular like phase of your life. The reason I went actually because I moved back to Bangladesh in 2008 and got involved in the business here, which is garments business, and we're trying to grow it. While my experience at Google kind of helped at a high level, just to understand how big companies work, systems, processes, culture, but I didn't really have a business background. And surprisingly, even like people in Bangladesh didn't really know about Stanford, right? I mean, you were like, oh, where'd you go to school? Stanford. They're like, oh, is that from Dhanmondi, Stanford University? So, I mean, I thought maybe, let's go do this MBA. Kind of planned it with my wife. So we went off at the same time. She went to Columbia at SIPA, so it's the School of International Public Affairs. Okay. So it was almost like a vacation, if you will, because, both of us getting away from Dhaka for 2 years. But at the same time, of course, it's Harvard MBA, it's a big name, everyone recognizes it in Bangladesh. And I think it kind of gave me a different perspective on business and management and how that world kind of plays out. Because a lot of what we're doing here is kind of, running an organization, and kind of the management skills kind of play into that. So that's something I decided, after I moved back to Bangladesh, that if I were to, go back to the US and take out 2 years, it's like 18 months really, right? I mean, it's not 2 years, 2 years. Then what would it have to be for me to like take that time off? And so then, I applied, got into Harvard. It's a Harvard MBA. So I was like, okay, maybe that's worth it, and maybe that'll like help in the future. So that was kind of the reasoning.
Are there any failures that has significantly affected your life?
Yeah, I mean, failures kind of shape who you are. So, I mean, yeah, I was just like, we were just talking earlier about how competitive it is, right, in college. So I remember the first CS class in my sophomore year. That was like more of an advanced programming class. The first assignment, I was in the lab for like the entire weekend, 3 days at a stretch. It didn't work. The program didn't come together, and failed the first assignment, right? And that's exactly when you're saying. So I went to my TA, who was, you know, a master's, like a CS person. He's like, look, this is Stanford CS, and not everyone is up for it. Like he kind of, you know, he's like, not everyone can pull it off, right? And that was incredibly frustrating because, you know, I wanted to do CS, and kind of I thought I could do it, but obviously it's very competitive and it's very high level of like standards. And, you know, so that was like interesting. Am I going to be able to pull this off, right? And not just that, like the sacrifice of kind of being in the lab for like 3 days when everyone else is like partying over the weekends, and, you know, is it worth it, kind of. So that's just an example, but, you know, eventually that class I think ended up getting an A regardless. So it's also the perspective that at that time it seemed like, oh my God, I can probably not even be a CS major. It's so intense. But that's only one kind of small step, right? So it's that assignment, then it's that class, and then you have like 20 other classes.
Yeah.
So it's just a step at a time. And I think it's good to have the perspective and also not get discouraged too much. Just have to take it, you know, one step at a time.
There are habits that you have, constantly knowledge, improve Arjun. It might be reading books, it might be reading articles.
Yeah, I mean, reading books, definitely, it's funny because a lot of people actually don't read books, and it's almost like, you know, they haven't grown up reading books, right? And that's just surprising because there's so much you can learn from reading books, and the people who don't, just like, they're at such a disadvantage.
Missing out.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, right? So definitely, like, I do enjoy reading books. It's like a hobby. So I guess that's a blessing in a way, because more than a hobby, it's actually kind of how I learn about the world, right? And like what's happening. And maybe different people learn about the world in different ways, but I always thought like reading books is probably the best way.
Like how you see things. Is there a particular advice or philosophy that has affected your life recently, Onik?
I think, yeah, I mean, things change, right? So I realized like when you're in your 20s, it's a totally different way of looking at the world. And like I was telling you, you think linearly. You're like, oh, I need to graduate, I need to get my first job, maybe I'll get a master's, I'll get a second job. And so it's a pretty clear path. And, or maybe, you know, whatever, like do a startup or something. But you kind of know what's happening. When you're in your 30s, things change around a lot, because then there's like no path, right? And unless, I mean, I still have a lot of friends who are, you know, in consulting and they're trying to make partner, or they're in banking and they're trying to make partner. So that's an artificial path, right? Because it's kind of, you know, it's a corporate path that's laid out that, okay, if you do this, you get to be a partner at McKinsey, or, you know, a managing director at Goldman. But for most people, once you're in your 30s, there is no path, right? So, because they might have switched around jobs, maybe they don't even like being in consulting or in banking or wherever. And so that's a time in your life where you kind of really need to figure out a lot of different things. Family-wise, you know, people are in different stages. Maybe if you're not married, you're looking for a partner. If you're married, maybe you want to have kids. If you have kids, you're busy with the kids. You know, a lot of challenges. You know, I think that's the age where like your parents start maybe getting older, and you know, they need more company, they need your support. Maybe they are ill, or you know, having some other challenges. So some people get divorced in their 30s or 40s, right? So there are a lot of these challenges that come up.
I don't usually think about these, but it's
and then you kind of have to figure it out. So it's not a linear path anymore. And then you're like, oh my God, you know, how do I balance work and career versus, you know, I mean, when I was doing the MBA and they went around the room, like, I think there was like 90 people in one of the classes, and they asked people to like write down what's their greatest kind of fear, or, you know, right now, like what's the biggest problem that they have. And everyone wrote it on a piece of paper, and then they kind of took it, it's anonymous, so then they opened it. And I think out of the 90 people, 70 people said that they're scared of being lonely, right? Because these are like very ambitious people who are at Harvard, they're doing the MBA, and they're probably in their late 20s now, and the thing that's on top of their mind is that, oh, I want to like, you know, settle down, I want to like find a partner and get married, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's just funny because, you know, they weren't worried about like what job they're going to get.
এরকম কি কখনো টাইম আসছে where you felt যে আচ্ছা মানে কি I'm not good enough বা mediocre, and how did you get out of that slump?
No, I mean, I think when you say you're not good enough, that's always the case, right? So anytime you're, you know, applying for something, you're, you know, going through an interview, you have a startup, you have like a new kind of challenge, that's always there. You know, are you not good enough? Is this gonna work? What will happen if it doesn't work, right? That fear of failure. So I think that's a constant. But then again, like, I think it's important not to like kind of let that overwhelm you. It's important to take it as a challenge. So it's kind of your perspective, how you look at it. I think it's not even a question of you're good enough or not. Like, you should know who you are, right? And everyone has the same thing. So no one's kind of, you know, good enough or like, you know, a genius to begin with. It's all a matter of perspective. And I think self-reflection. So trying to figure out, what do I need to do to kind of make it happen, like whatever you're trying to do, and what are the risk factors, why may I not be successful, and then once you're past that, you look back and you figure out, okay, you know, like, did it work? So it's constant self-reflection that is helpful. So I think that's even the wrong question, right? So you shouldn't be like, oh, am I good enough or not? You're you. So it's, and you know, that's how it is. There's always going to be competition. And sometimes you might not even want something, right? So you think you need that job, or you want to kind of do something because everyone else thinks that's really cool. But so you should first of all even be sure if that's something that you want, or, you know, and then don't get caught up in this whole am I good enough kind of thing, or what will happen if I fail. Take it up as a challenge. I think that's the most important thing.
Are there day-to-day or weekly habits that you have that have helped you a lot?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, staying fit is quite important. So, I mean, nowadays, like, you know, it's really good to have discipline. So even just like, I try to get to bed by, say, 12:30, right?
It's difficult.
We just stop because, and then it's because I need to wake up by 6:30, and then I try to hit the gym in the morning. And you can't do that unless you get some good sleep. And you can't even watch TV an hour before you go to sleep, because if you watch TV, then you can't sleep well and you can't wake up the next morning, right? And then of course you have to eat well. So yeah, it sounds like kind of an old man speaking, because, you know, maybe, you know, you don't think about that when you're younger. But so then that kind of leads into like the workout in the morning, and that kind of gives you the energy for the rest of the day, right? And then kind of get to work and come back. So, you know, that discipline is important. And I see a lot of people who kind of don't have that. And, you know, I mean, you do kind of, it affects, you know, how much work you can get done over like, you know, a period of time. So, because, you know, it's like keeping fit is important, eating well is important, and that kind of plays into kind of how much energy you have at work, how focused you are. And yeah, again, like maybe when we were younger, like it didn't matter, but it definitely
still matters a lot to me.
Yeah, you know,
I
and
prioritize sleep, working out, food over everything.
Exactly, right? And those things kind of come into like, and then once you start the day, you have like maybe the 8 or 10 hours at work, and how do you make the best use of that time? So unless you get those other things right, you know, you can't really kind of utilize the work time that you have. And then of course, beyond work, what's also important is like you get done with work, and then you have time left to do the other things, right? So spend time with the family, you know, read books. So even that requires planning, because otherwise you're just too busy, right? And then you don't have time to do things that you actually like doing. So I think it's important to kind of have that discipline. Just then, that's more of a day-to-day thing. But especially in Dhaka, I feel like people kind of get lost in terms of their schedules, and it's tough. So with all the traffic and all the inefficiencies.
I had this question, are there things you do but when mental practices aren't shakalutlan, it's very hard to stay motivated to do good work every day. So are there things you do to stay motivated?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of the meditation's really important.
And when you ask yourself when you're meditating, when everyone says that a lot, but how do you meditate?
So meditation, it's actually quite tough. So I actually don't meditate a lot. My wife does, and it really helped her. I just go to the gym and try to kind of use that as kind of the recharge time. But I think the thing with meditation is that it's kind of the outlook, it's a perspective. That's important. And obviously if you're sitting there, you're meditating and you kind of go over the events, what happened yesterday, what am I going to do today, what are the challenges. It's like self-reflection, right? And just trying to figure out why it is that you're doing what you're doing, why other people kind of are the way they are, how do you react to that? Do you react positively to situations which may not be going as well as you expected? So just kind of going through that and kind of figuring out. So I think meditation, or when we talk about it, it's about taking a step back and not reacting to every day. So because every day it's like you're on the move, there's traffic in the streets, things are not working, your project's behind schedule, someone's not being cooperative, there's a lot of negative things going on in our lives, and you can't be reacting to every single thing. So I think when you say meditation, it's just a practice of kind of stepping back and kind of figuring out, okay, what's important, what's not, how should I react to negative events, gratitude is important, right? So am I thankful for the things that are actually
learned? I'm an ambitious student looking of Bangladeshi origin. I want to be a business person, or I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'm getting a lot of advice out there. Can you identify some bad advice that I shouldn't follow?
Bad advice?
Bad advice.
Well, I think even just do you want to be an entrepreneur? That's something that's very cool nowadays, and you kind of read about a lot, but then you only read about the success factors, right? And the people who are successful. And that gets played up a lot in our culture. But then it's not for everyone, right? So that's something that even I would question outright, that not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, or, so that's something you got to figure out. You just shouldn't even that shouldn't be the default. And there's a lot of things that you can learn in kind of having a career or getting a proper job, that in working in a bigger organization, which is valuable as well. So not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur out of college, just because Bill Gates and Zuckerberg dropped out, right? So I think you only hear about the success stories, you hear about the good stories, but it's actually quite tough. But having said that, I don't want to discourage would-be entrepreneurs, but I think there's a time for everyone at different stages of life, and that's an option that could always be available even later. So you just got to figure out where you are, and kind of don't just kind of follow advice that's that's cool or sexy at the moment, or what you read about in magazines, or so that's definitely one, because I think people because so much of what you want to do is kind of determined by what you read about, right? The success stories that
what
you kind
of talking about.
Yeah, and and those are again the 1% or 0.1%. So don't. It's good to know about Bill Gates and his life story, but what about all the other people at Microsoft?
Let's talk about lessons and advice, and then we can end the interview. Lessons, let's say, throughout your journey of helping run Ononto, what are some of the biggest lessons you have learned?
In terms of professional, like
professional lessons. It could be personal. Sometimes they're very related.
so, the garment industry in Bangladesh, it's quite interesting. You're dealing with a lot of people. And we have, in our organization, we have over 25,000 people.
Wow.
And it's really manual, right? I mean, kind of how the work gets done. You're dealing, this is not machines that make a pair of, jeans and whatnot. It's literally every single stitch is by someone, using their hands, using their mind, and, the quality comes from that individual operator, right? So, and that productivity, the efficiency comes from that person. So unlike most other manufacturing, this is entirely people dependent. So I think that has a huge kind of, aspect. I mean, any company, any business is driven by people, but in our industry, when you're at that scale, it's very interesting to understand, the human side of it, like why people come to work in a garment factory, right? They're not paid a lot. It's pretty hard work. And in spite of that, and then there's a lot of stuff that's happening at home, right? People are getting sick because they don't have, access to good quality water or food or medicines. There's a lot of traffic and, stuff on the road to work. They're late. So, just the environment that we live in Bangladesh, it's quite crazy. And the fact that people come in and do what they do in the garment industry is quite amazing, because there's so many people working together, getting, stuff done, stuff made with good quality, on time. So unless you figure out the human part, you cannot run a big organization like that. And so when I say the human part, again, like what motivates people, what gets them to come in and give their best at work, what kind of a culture do you want it to be, right? And it's not a Silicon Valley culture. I mean, yeah, that's part of it, but you're not really gonna have, free food and drinks and all the perks that you'd get at Google, because the resources are limited in Bangladesh. But okay, so how do we kind of at least have a good culture in the company? How do people learn? How do they get skills? Because unless you train them the relevant skills, they're not going to be able to get it, right? Because they're so busy, they're spending 10, 12 hours working and then their family. So they're never learning. And if they're not learning, they're not getting better. So that's a part of figuring out how do you improve the skills within the organization. So I think those are interesting points that definitely you don't think about when you maybe think of the industry.
That's personally or professionally or both, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well, that's again, I think it's very difficult when you're in your 30s or 40s. There's a lot of things going on, and things might change, but having said that, since now I'm back in Bangladesh, I don't think I'm, moving back to the US or kind of doing something completely different. I mean, who knows? But so I do see myself in Bangladesh in terms of trying to make an impact here in this country. And I've always seen myself as kind of a bridge between, the West and Bangladesh. So when I say the West, gone to the US, studied in the best universities, seen how the best companies work, and how do you kind of
bring that,
right? Filter those ideas, the technologies, the partnerships, and how do you kind of, even investors, and you can do that best if you're here and kind of doing it on the ground. That's my opinion. So that's what personally I've seen my role as, kind of trying to bring new things into Bangladesh. What new products can we make in Bangladesh? What new ideas can we apply? What technologies can we, that's not already employed here? So, and obviously you're well positioned if you have like studied in the US or kind of have that outlook. So I think that's where I add value. So it's good to like know that I will be in Bangladesh, but I will constantly try to kind of bring new things into the country.
It was talking about how Bangladesh was like the second biggest RMG exporter after China, and now Vietnam is catching up because our product variety is not that good. So I hope you can solve that problem.
Yeah, exactly. So there's still a lot of challenges.
It's
not a given.
Right. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
He looks in fantastic touch.